Okay, this is the second part where we will have some comments from Wray, who was also in the movie, and from me, and then general discussion, questions and answers. Do you want to go first?
Okay.
I would say 15 minutes, something like that.
Okay, probably less.
Okay, I will take what you...
I thought I would just say a couple of words about Minsky for those who don't know him. He studied at Chicago, University of Chicago, which was a very different place in the 30s and 40s than it is in the post-war period, when it became known as the place of Milton Friedman and Lucas and the far right-wing economics, free market economics. When he was there as institutionalist. He moved on to Harvard. He got his PhD at Harvard. He studied with Robert Solow and with Paul Samuelson. When he came out, he very quickly published articles in the very top mainstream journals. He counted among his personal friends Samuelson, Arrow, Solow, and many of the other people who went on to get Nobel Prizes.
Sweezy too.
Sweezy. I'm just trying to say that he was in this group of the very top economists in the world. But he sort of went his own direction. He started off doing math models, and then he decided that he couldn't really say what he needed to say using math models. So he moved into writing in plain English. And for that reason, he was sort of sidelined, as was mentioned in the movie. By the 1970s, he was doing some of his best work, but it was ignored, as they talk about in the movie, in part because he's not publishing in the AER now, and because he's saying things that are, as Jamie Galbraith said, inconvenient for the economics profession. I began studying with him in the early 80s, and some of you may know we had a savings and loan crisis in the 1980s. A huge crash of a sector of our banking system. And Minsky enjoyed some limelight during that period. People actually did start to read Minsky. And he was getting invitations to give talks in the US and around the world. So things had improved quite a bit. He spent most of his career teaching at Berkeley, then at Washington University in St. Louis, and then when he retired, he moved to the Levy Institute in upstate New York in 1990, and then he died in 1996. In the middle of the 1960s, we were going through the Clinton years. These were seemingly a return to the 60s, in the sense that we had a fairly stable economy, at least on the surface. We had returned to relatively high growth rates that we had not seen since the 60s, and unemployment rates had gone down. So in other words, things looked pretty good. But Minsky had begun warning that our financial system had evolved over the whole post-war period to become extremely fragile. And he was writing working papers at the Levy Institute, and actually had started a new book that he wasn't able to complete before his death, in which he argued we need to reconstitute the financial system. We needed to completely reform the financial system. And of course, he died in '96. The crisis didn't occur until 2007. So 10 years after his death. So he wasn't around when the crisis hit, but a few people, including George Magnus, who was in the video, Cassidy, John Cassidy was in the video, and Paul McCulley, who worked at PEMCO, all immediately said, this is a Minsky crisis. And so people like Krugman started rereading Minsky, or maybe reading Minsky for the first time. And Minsky, again, got the recognition that he would deserve. So Terry Jones decided to do a video on Minsky and, as you saw, Galbraith. He lined up a bunch of interviews. He came to Harvard, and I was interviewed there. So was Steve Keen at Harvard. And he basically had two choices on what direction to go with this movie. One would have been much more Minskyan. It would have dealt with this long-term evolution of the financial system and of the economy, from relative stability in the 1950s to very fragile in the 1990s, and then a collapse in the 2000s. Or he could have gone the direction that he actually went, which is to focus on bubbles, bubble mania, and the history of speculative excesses. And I think that is a weakness of the movie in terms of presenting Minsky. Probably it's a benefit in terms of getting an audience, because it's a lot of fun, the tulip mania stuff and all that. But you shouldn't think that what has been presented here is doing a perfect or fantastic job of presenting Minsky's own approach to the transformation of the economy. When the crisis hit, I said, it's not a Minsky moment, it's a Minsky half-century. Minsky was describing these long-run processes that would make it, a Great Depression, possible again. In the early post-war period, he said a depression is not possible in the early post-war period because we have put in place a framework that ensures that it cannot happen again. But by the 90s, he started saying, actually, now it can happen again. So we crashed. And this was a systemic crash. It wasn't just a bubble that crashed like a tulip bubble. This was a systemic crash. It was a crash of the entire economic system crashed in 2007. In the same way that the entire economic system crashed in 1929. In 1929, when we crashed, that stage of capitalism was called finance capitalism by Minsky, and he borrowed the term from Hilferding. That system disappeared. It was gone. We created a new kind of capitalism in the 1930s with the New Deal, with very tight regulations on the financial system, creating a social safety net, having a government that became very much larger. When the crash came in 1929, the US federal government was 3% of the economy. We came out of World War II, it was 25% of the economy. When we crashed in 1929, the Fed probably made things worse rather than coming to the rescue of the financial system. Okay? Skip forward to the crash in 2007. The government in the United States, again, was over 20% of the economy, and the Fed intervened with $29 trillion of loan originations. You heard me right, $29 trillion of loan originations. It dwarfed anything that they did in the Great Depression. Unfortunately, we saved this kind of capitalism. Instead of letting it fail and creating a new kind, this time we propped it back up, patted it on the back, said, good job, go do it again. And they're out there doing it again. They talk about bubbles and crashes. I have a friend named Frank Veneroso who has studied bubbles and crashes. It says, typically what happens, you have a bubble, a crash, and then you might get an echo bubble. Okay? You can crash, and then people say, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as we thought. And you can get an echo bubble of that. It usually only goes to about 2/3 the size of the first bubble. This time, we had a bubble and crash, the dot-com bubble and crash. We had the 2007-2008 bubble and crash, and in between we had an echo bubble. And now we are back in a bubble that dwarfs the bubble we saw in 2008. The bubble this time is very much bigger. And it's, in 2008, it was simultaneously commodities markets, stock market, and housing market. Now it's true the housing market is not bubbling yet, but it is recovering in the United States. But the stock market and commodities market bubbles were bigger than they were in 2007, 2008. So we propped it up, we bubbled again for the third time, which apparently is the first time ever this has happened. We did not reform the financial system. We are poised for another crash because we did not change the kind of capitalism. So there are lots of specific things about the movie, but I just wanted to say sort of a weakness of the movie is that it's not really capturing what Minsky was all about.
Okay, me too, I'm saying something with the opposite order. That is, I start from the movie and go towards more general consideration. I think that this will become a classic on this crisis. They call it the 2008 crisis, though I think actually the crisis started in 2007, and the movie says that with the subprime crash. The movie is thought about by Theo Koken, who is a European, I think, entrepreneur and economist, and probably he is responsible of the general direction of the movie, and Terry Jones. Terry Jones, as somebody probably have recognized him, is an ex-Monty Python, or a Monty Python, actually I don't know if they ever dissolved, and he is responsible for the animated cartoons. So it not only will become a classic, it will become probably the funniest movie about the crisis. There is another classic movie on this crisis, and it is Inside Job, who also is a very good movie. After 2007, 2008, a lot of festivals of movie on the crisis has been constructed, starting from the movies on the great crash of the 29, the most famous probably Grapes of Wrath, from the novel by Faulkner. I said that one of the good things of the movie is that it is funny, the animated cartoon, Terry Jones. Another good thing is the historical survey on the past financial crisis. This does not mean that one has to agree on every term. There are also a lot of nice quotes. I would want just to remember the infamous quote by Irving Fisher. For those who don't know who Irving Fisher is, he is one of the most famous neoclassical economists, monetary neoclassical economists. He is responsible of the theory of interest of neoclassical theory. He is the father, maybe the most representative theorist of the quantity theory of money. And as you have heard, I think in the summer of 29, it said that the prices of stocks has reached a permanently high plateau.
It's September.
September.
1 month.
1 month before, which was very unfortunate. We must say that somehow he learned the lesson, because 32 or 33, he wrote a classic article, Debt Deflation Theory of the Depression, I think, which is one of the sources of Minsky. Another good quote is the one by Paul Mason. This is a more personal remembrance. At a certain point, he is a very famous and very radical, very leftist journalist of The Guardian. He said about the teaching of economics that in the economics faculties, only the idea that capitalist economies are stable and that finance is stable, well, only this is allowed. Let me remember that the Italian university since 2000 has been plagued by a series of reforms of the curricula. In 2001, in my personal view, this crisis actually started in 2001 with the crisis of the so-called internet economy, internet bubble. Well, in 2001 and 2008, we discussed in our department the changing of the curriculum. In both instances, I proposed a course on the economics of financial instability. My department was named after Hyman Minsky. The director of the department said, no, we can say this to the students. It's ideological. Of course, saying that the markets are stable, the financial markets are stable, is not ideological. Let me go to the limits of the movie. I very much agree with what Randy said. There is a psychological view of the crisis and a psychological view of Minsky. This is actually very influential. It started Minsky alive, and I think that Minsky looked at it with some sympathy probably, because it is why he became famous. When he was used by Charles Kindleberger at the beginning of his book, who was originally titled Panics and Crashes, or Crashes and Panics. Manias, Panics and Crashes. Then became the history of financial crisis. The idea is that the economic system, after a period of stability, breeds optimism. And after that, there is the bubble, and then there is the crash, and there is the pessimism. It is not an issue of optimism and pessimism that, of course, are there. It is the fact that the system inherently becomes unstable on, if you want to say it in this way, on objective measures, because more and more for a while the real results of the economy are better than expected. At this point, agents become optimists. Indeed, Minsky drew this kind of interpretation. It is true what was said in the movie, by Krugman, by the way, that he had this idea of an inherently unstable system in a long cycle view. Capitalism is different in these long cycles, and this is a typical Minsky lesson. And this Minsky took from Schumpeter some Keynes, and then the person behind Schumpeter and Keynes somehow. Schumpeter knew this, Keynes didn't know this, or not very well. Who was this person? Minsky called Schumpeter and Keynes conservative Marxist. And the third person was, of course, Marx. The idea of Minsky was that there are fundamental flaws in capitalism. Capitalism can be saved, but will never permanently save. Instability will rise again in a different direction. Actually, also in this movie, these phrases of his, "Can it happen again?" is quoted as if his answer was yes. Well, actually, Minsky, as the faults of many of us non-orthodox economists, he was able to forecast 5 of the last 2 great crises. That said, the others never saw anything coming. And it is true that more and more during the 90s and the 2000s, it may happen more and more again, though I think in a somehow different way. Even the way the crisis comes after some increase in debt has changed, because the money manager of capitalism, as Minsky called the capitalism after Reagan and Thatcher, but the beginning is in the mid-60s, this money manager capitalism was based essentially on households' debt. Well, there is another, maybe it is a big point, minor here, on which I disagree. I don't think that actually free market ideologist believes that the markets reach automatically an optimum. This was true once. They are much, much worse. They are putting forward a political project from above. The same subjects, the same preferences of people, the same education need to be constructed so that they believe in this ideology, but actually the neoliberals never went back to pure laissez-faire. But the biggest problem, in my view, with the movie is in the end. The naturalism of the explanation of the crisis. It is the fault of human nature. Here let me quote again Marx, because Marx thought that in capitalism human beings, even though they don't know that, create fetishes. Fetishes are real. Fetishes are effective. Finance is effective. The stock market, the wheeling of the markets, every day it is on the newspaper. This is real. But fetishism is a completely different thing. It is to attribute these features to the thing themselves as natural things. So that is not really convincing. Let me close with 2 things. If I should do a festival of movies on the crisis, I would show Grapes of Wrath, Mary Poppins, Life is Wonderful, and as I told you, Inside Job, and this movie. But I will end with the best movie on the crisis. It is not a good movie, but the idea is absolutely great. It is In Time by Andrew Niccol. It is of 2012. It is a society plagued by unemployment, exploitation, inequality. Time is the local currency. It is written on the arms of people. They, after 25 years, are actually nothing but dead men walking, or not to be so chauvinist, dead human beings walking. Simply, there are the very rich who can live centuries or 1,000 years, and there are the very poor who have 24 hours. Though there is plenty of time to live forever for everyone. This cannot happen because the upper class is managing the cost of livings and the loans, so that this cannot happen. I don't spoil to you the story. The story, as I said, was filmed as its own weakness. Well, but this is a good way to mix Marx, Keynes, and Minsky. The last point is about, it is dual actually, about education and the way out. At the end, you see this important movement of the students, Rethinking Economics, the Initiative for Pluralism, in economics. I understand this, but I am old actually. I am not very happy with this plea for pluralism. I am for the plurality of economic theory, not so much for pluralism. The point is that mainstream or mainstreams are wrong. And this was the position of Keynes, was the position even of Schumpeter, was the position of Minsky, was the position of Marx in some time, should be our position. It is not just enough that students has to be exposed to different ideas, because here on the rhetoric of economics, the mainstream will always win. So students live in a society, they should find a way to link with society and to battle, because new good ideas goes up. I completely agree that we are in a series of bubbles. We never went out of bubbles. But I think that actually neoliberalism as we knew it until 2007, 2008 is dead. We are living with an undead, a zombie. Why is it dead? And we have bubbles. And everybody hopes that bubbles will give new growth. Because before it was true that bubble, in a very perverse way, gives way to growth. Now we have bubbles. Do not forget the debt student bubble. We don't have it yet, but you have it. Bubbles are not able, we are in a dual economy. Bubbles are there, but does not ratchet, so to speak, the real economy. So we have to go somewhere else. I think that somewhere else must be stronger than what the way out of the original New Deal and Keynesianism, maybe putting them together. I think that a good way out is the one that Minsky proposed, a socialization of investment, much more radical than Keynes actually, a socialization of money and finance, a socialization of employment. Well, once there was this Latin phrase, hic Rhodus, hic salta. This is Rhodus, here you have to jump. Maybe we will not be able to do this jump, but actually it is our problem, because I don't think that capitalism will die, but we may have much worse capitalism and some kind of barbarism. Well, after 29 and 30, there was not just the New Deal. There was Nazism, there was the Second World War. We actually went out from the crisis to Second World War. So don't take out barbarism from the equation. Now the floor is...
I'd like to say, just to clarify something that I think is a little misleading in the movie, both on the 1929 crash and also on the 2007 crash. And that is, they make it sound like it was the bubble in the stock market and then the bubble in subprime mortgages that really was the problem. And in neither case is this true. Yes, we had a stock market bubble. Irving Fisher got it completely wrong. It crashed. That was important. But you could see the Great Depression coming for a very long time in advance. In the movie, they interviewed someone who said 1926. They found some newspaper articles. Thorstein Veblen, who was America's greatest economist, the institutionalist, argued in 1919 they were coming to a Great Depression. And the reason is because of what do you call sabotage. What he meant was the business interests withholding productive capacity in order to constrain output to push up prices. So he warned that they would be reducing aggregate demand, it would lead to stagnation and to efforts to cut back production ever more to keep prices up. All of these things were exactly what happened in the 1930s. With regard to the US real estate bubble, yes, we had a tremendous real estate bubble. We could plot Euroland's real estate bubble right on top of the US real estate bubble. They are identical. Okay, so yes, we had a housing price bubble. That is true. It collapsed in the US and in Europe. Subprime mortgages played a minor role in this. They made it sound like it's a subprime mortgage bubble. That is not true. In the US, about 40% of all subprime mortgages were not to buy a house. They were cash out equity. It was borrowing against a home you already owned. This was not poor people getting into housing. They had houses. It was being duped by mortgage brokers to go into debt on a house they already owned and go out and spend the money on something else. And it was lender fraud. Lender fraud is what drove the subprime mortgages, okay? So it is true that our home ownership rates have been rising since Clinton, but the subprime mortgages get an unfair blame on this. We also had something called Alt-A mortgages, and the ninja loans that they're talking about, the stated income, you know, no income, no job, no asset, don't worry, we'll give you the loan. Those were mostly Alt-A. They were not subprime. And they were to higher income people, higher wealth people. They were to small business owners who were buying houses that they probably never should have bought. Alt-A's were worse. And prime mortgages, which are supposedly the best mortgages, the most creditworthy people, had exactly the same abuses and also nearly the same default rates. Okay, so what I'm saying is it was throughout the housing sector, very bad loans were being made, not just to low-income people, which are always taking the rap for this unfairly. Now, why was all of this going on? And this is completely left out of the movie. Why on earth are banks making loans that they know the borrowers can't repay? Why are they doing that? Then why are they packaging these things together and selling them off to pension funds and other investors, including central banks around the world? The reason was largely fraud. They were engaged in massive frauds. Every single part of the mortgage finance food chain was fraudulent. It was all fraud. In the beginning, I didn't believe this, but as I studied it more and more and more, before and after the crisis came, I became convinced it was all fraud. And it was perpetrated by the biggest financial institutions in the world. They were all bailed out by the United States Federal Reserve Bank. And by propping them back up, by looking the other way at the fraud, by not prosecuting the top management who oversaw the fraud, we've set ourselves up for continuation of the fraud, continuation of the bubbles, and another crash.
Okay, this is the moment in which there could be questions and interventions from the floor.
I have just a question for both of us. Just a question for both of us, because I think it is the most important discourse.
Speak in the microphone, otherwise it will not be recorded, and we want you to be recorded.
Yeah, I think that the most interesting discourse to do in this occasion is the fact that there's some suggestions in the movie. And one of the suggestions regards the possibility to change the university and the way in which economics, or better, political economy, is explained in university, and because there's an implicit argument that is that the way in which institutions lead the system, the economic system is influenced and is formed by the universities. So I would like to have your opinion about, first of all, this argument. Are you agree with this argument? There's universities that have the responsibility of the education of the institutions, first question. And the second question that is linked is, what may be a way to reform, to change the undergraduate program in a university? I'm very curious to know, for example, what is the approach of the Missouri Kansas City University, because we are trying. I'm an heterodox, if you want to define, but I'm when I teach in the first year, what I can do is just to add something to the handbook, just to invite people to have open mind. But it is very hard for me, also because I am just a researcher, to impose another reading list or another way to educate students. Also because the argument that the dean of the department or the not Riccardo but other colleagues say to me is, but we have to prepare students for entering in the job markets. Okay, so that's.
I would take some other questions if possible. That is, I would like to do at least one round. First, not from there, because you know that you are videotaping. We need you to speak on the microphone. And to be on the video, especially because of your France 98 t-shirt.
France 98, on a gagné.
On a gagné? Vous avez gagné, c'est bon.
Well, my question is, I'm a student of the Master course of Economics and Global Market, and first I have to thank Professor Bellofiore to give the chance of see this really interesting movie and to have here Professor Randall, which I saw it was a really good professor actually. And my question is this: don't you think that actually after seeing this movie, people just say, what actually, what could we say? What could we do? It seems that actually crises are so natural that, well, we just have to accept it. And so there is nothing about, for example, fiscal policy. Nothing about the role of the state. The role of state, okay, the state regulator. But then, what about the actually concrete action of the state into the economy? And to me, this is quite a big lack. Also for, if you want talk about Hyman Minsky and you take just the part of the instability and you don't take the part of the actual role of the state into the real economy as an actor, to me is a limit. Don't you think this is another big issue of the movie? Well, just then, if I can take just 1 minute. Actually, you saw in the movie that there were easy pay horrific in economics, the cell of an international network of students for pluralism. And I'm happy to say that also in Bergamo there is a cell of rethinking economics, and it's us, me and my colleague. So if you want, just join us for Change the World. You can just come talk with us, and that's it.
Other interventions? If there are no other interventions, at least in this round, I would ask Randy to give his answers, and then you will have, unfortunately, also mine.
Okay, changing the university. You saw in the movie there was the professor who dropped dead. I think that that was a reference to Paul Samuelson. He was asked, you know, how do you make progress in economics? He says, economics makes progress one death at a time. And I mean, that's basically the answer. You have to wait for these guys to die. Was the answer they were giving you in the film. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. For the reasons that were explained in the film. Once you've spent 25 years of your life working with some stupid little model, that is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And you're not going to just suddenly abandon it. Changing your mind in economics is very, very rare. Once in a while you do come across someone who has, but it doesn't happen very often. Now, I'm actually still reasonably optimistic about the United States educational system. I can admit, when the crisis hit, Jamie Galbraith and I were on a panel at the AEA, and we said, oh, good, you know, it's over. It's all over. No one is ever going to teach efficient...
You have to explain your acronyms, because we are not US.
American Economic Association annual meetings. Okay, so it's the big 20,000 economists meet. And we were on a panel, you know, the teaching of economics in the aftermath of the crisis. And so we were extremely optimistic. We said, it's all over, you know. There's nobody who could teach efficient markets hypothesis, rational expectations, real business cycle theory with a straight face in front of students anymore. It's gone. No one's going to teach that stuff anymore. Well, it turned out we were wrong, of course. They're still teaching it. But I'm still reasonably optimistic about the United States. And the reason is because we have 5,000 colleges in the United States. And most of these colleges actually want their professors to teach something that interests the students and that actually benefits the students. And the students want to know what happened in the crisis. What's going on right now? Okay? Are we recovering or not? Why is inequality still so high and still rising in the United States? Why has more than 100% of all the recovery gone to the top 1% of the population and nothing has gone to the bottom 99%? In the United States, they want the professor to teach that. Now, not at Harvard, not at MIT, you're not supposed to teach that to your students. So what the students at those places have done, they started walking out of the classes. There actually was a boycott, a protest of Gregory Mankiw's introductory class at Harvard. The guy who wrote the textbook that everybody in the world uses. The students boycotted and picketed outside his classroom because they don't want to study that. A similar thing happened in the 60s, and there actually was an opening. The universities started hiring a whole bunch of Marxists at these places because the students demanded it. In the United States, because we have so many colleges, we have no what's called research exercises around the world. We have no government that tells us what we must teach. And so each college is more or less free to teach what they want to teach. And the students have some ability to pressure the university to teach stuff that is relevant. So we're doing actually a pretty good job. At University of Missouri, Kansas City, our program is 100% heterodox. All of our students are heterodox. And every one of our students gets a tenure track position teaching economics. They're spreading all over the United States. They're teaching the stuff that's correct. And they are pretty much free to teach what they want to teach in the classroom. Now, there still is a big problem because most of these schools that my students go to don't have any PhD programs. PhD education is still dominated by very mainstream departments. There are only a handful of departments that teach heterodox economics at the PhD level. So the training of economists who will be the next generation is very poor. And that is a big problem. And it's even a problem that's recognized at some of the places that are very orthodox. Things have gotten so bad that they don't even have anyone who could actually teach macroeconomics because the mainstream hasn't turned out any macroeconomists for 25 or 30 years. They only teach micro, even in the macro courses. So I'm somewhat optimistic there. Okay, second, there was a question about the influence on policy making. I think that actually it's fairly satisfying that policymakers really don't listen to economists. They really don't. What they do is they try to find an economist who will support them in what they already want to do. Okay? And if we do crash again, which I think we will, and the crash this time could be much harder to get out of than it was last time, for reasons, if you want to know, I could explain why in the US it would be very hard to do the same thing we did last time. So it may be harder to get out. And the policymakers might be more open to more fundamental change than we got the last time around. And that will be what pushes us to better policy. It's not really going to be that the economics discipline is woken up and has started doing things that are relevant to real-world policymaking. So I think most of the time, policymakers don't really listen that much to economists. They just use them to justify what they already want to do. And I would say in the United States, at least, Jamie Galbraith, who's in this film, can get before Congress and testify before Congress as often as any of the mainstream people. So it's very common that when a senator wants testimony, they want to get someone from the free market branch and someone who's against the free market branch. And so Jamie and Dean Baker and others get to testify far more than you would think, given that they're in this tiny little heterodox school of thought with very little influence in the economic discipline. They have an outsized influence in policymaking. Okay, the final thing on what can we do? The movie seems to say it's all natural human behavior, which is true. But I really like the anthropologist's view, which I think would also be a Minskian view, which is we're not going to change. We can't make people rational individually. Okay, and I think that is correct. I'm with Riccardo. There is no such thing as a natural human behavior, but the kind of rationality that neoclassical economists presume is just impossible. Okay, it is impossible to have rational expectations. So we are irrational, at least in that sense of the term. So what we have to do is change the system. I think that is right. Okay, did they offer anything specific on how to change the system? No, they didn't. This movie did not do that really at all. And so yes, we need concrete policy recommendations. They're not in this movie. Minsky was developing some in the early 90s, as I said. Absolutely, we need to put a bigger role on fiscal policy. And a big part of our problem in 1929 and a big part of our problem in 2007 was that fiscal policy was far too restrictive. Now in the 20s, the federal government was only 3% of the economy. It wasn't big enough, really, to be stimulative anyway. In 2007, it certainly was big enough, but it was actually taking demand out of the economy. Clinton started that with the budget surpluses. And in fact, that is all related to this story of why were they securitizing all of this trashy mortgage debt. It was because there wasn't enough Treasury debt out there. So ironically, you have the Treasury running a budget surplus and continuing with fiscal austerity even after the surplus disappeared. So the private sector was creating the financial assets that the financial sector wanted. They preferred to have treasuries, but the Treasury wasn't creating them. So they created what they thought was the next best thing, which was securitized mortgages. There wasn't even enough of that in terms of safe mortgages, so they started securitizing trash. What are they securitizing now? Student loans, auto-related debt. These are exploding. They're both over $1 trillion right now in the United States. So these are the new areas. Why are they doing this? Partly fraud, but partly because they want financial assets, and the Treasury is gradually reducing the number of treasuries that it is sending out there into the financial sector. So that is a big part of the problem too. Fiscal austerity, even in the United States.
Okay, very quick answers in the measure which it is possible. On the second answer, I am totally on his position, so I would go that way, and I will not answer. I just add, but this is related somehow, I think, to the first question by Stefano Lucarelli about the role of the macroeconomist. There is a famous paper by an economist that definitely I do not like, which is with Menkyu. The paper is The Macroeconomist as Scientist and Engineer. It's an UMBR paper, I think. You find it online. He's asking, are we economists scientists or just engineers? What he says, you have to understand that Menkyu was in the Council of Economic Advisors of Bush Jr. He was in the Council of the Federal Reserve. He knows what he's saying. He is the one, by the way, who is defending the 1%, and he is the typical economist. He said at the last American Economic Association meeting, who does not know that the notion of capital in neoclassical theory is faulty, and it is shown since the 60s. His point is, look, in every decision and in every discussion, we just use macroeconomics as learned and taught until the beginning of the 70s. All that is being written later was useless, except for these ideological matters. Some more specific answers to Lucarelli. Well, this link between economics, economic theory, even political economy, to institutions, well, this is the permanence. There is nothing new. How to change? Well, you know, I came in Turin in '69. It was just after the '68. There was a student movement. The '68 actually in the US started in '64, if not '60, '63, the free speech movement, Berkeley, etc. It was very effective. There was a problem which had a kind of mirror image among the economists. The problem is that, unfortunately, when they started to radicalize themselves and hit with the society, they left the university because they had much more important things to do. No? In Turin was to go to the gates of Fiat or other places. I am all in favor of that. Just they left the university, and then they didn't care. I said that this is a mirror image of what happened among the economists. There was this famous controversy in the mid-60s from the Cambridge in the UK versus Cambridge in the US on the notion of capital. It was one of the rare instances in which there was a clear winner. It was Cambridge, UK. It was a disaster. Why? Because it was also a disaster when a lot of people from the movement or from the radicalized professors became Marxists. Because they were closed in university, they became just academicians, actually, and in some instances they tried to show that the dominant theory was wrong logically. That's a dead end. How you should change the curriculum? As you know, I think that it is an important issue, but not just on the PhD, nor the master. You, exactly, I was saying, you are absolutely right that the point is to start with the undergraduate. Now, there, my ass was very, very, very fortunate, very lucky, because in Italy, and this probably, I don't know if it was a difference from the United States, in Italy, the point is that we never had what nowadays would be called the heterodox, who taught heterodox theory. We were forced to learn from the beginning the plurality of economics theory, just from the first year. So we had to know the different theories. So I agree with you that it is very wrong, and I had this. Professors who teach you traditional macro, and in the last lecture tell you that it is a technical term, bullshit. But I want to learn them, all the theories, because they need to know them from inside. Why, according to me, they are wrong. But you need to be exposed to these different theories. Also because my attitude is that there is nothing which is purely right. Here, unfortunately, I am much more pessimist, probably because I am in Italy, than you on our system. In Italy, in the 60s and the 70s, the economists and universities were the most radicalized. I'm not strictly speaking a Keynesian, or Keynesian, I don't know what is the right pronunciation. The point is that Italy was never Keynesian. 40s and 50s, the attitude was much more conservative. The influence of Austrian theory, German theory, etc. In the 60s and 70s, everybody thought they were at the left of Keynes. Maybe they mixed it with this, with that. So we never had a Keynesian tradition. After 79, 80, there was a U-turn tradition. So I'm sure if there are manifestations on the streets, all these economists, who are also dying, would take their Marx, because they know Marx, they will take their Keynes. It is irrelevant in their teaching. You raise another very important issue, the labor market. This has been a tragic error on the part of universities, because the point is not just to deny that there is a change in the labor market, that there is a new capitalism which changes, they say, competences, skill, etc. The point is to say that exactly because the labor market is changing so dramatically and innovations are there, to believe that you can plan now what will be the right student for the market is one of the two errors. One is to take the students as customers. The other is to think that they are just a mechanical kind of tailorist for these tools, and that you can do for the university what they deny you can do elsewhere. Have a Soviet, USSR Soviet planning. In this situation, the competitive choice should be to give critical attitudes, so a wider knowledge to the students. Nobody did this better, either because they were too conservative or because they thought that it was compromising with capitalism. We have friends who think that who cares about this thing? I give the minimum to every student, it will be the labor market and the bad capital or which select this. Just two quick notes. A reason why I am pessimist, and it is that this crisis is different than the other one from the point of view of economic theory. John Robinson, we had a debate here with Sawyer, Rochon, and Domenica Tropeano. John Robinson said in the early 70s that there was a second crisis of economic theory. The first one was with the Great Crash. Keynes was the answer. The second one was 60s, early 70s. In both instances, with all of the limits, there was a change in the profession. There was something which was asked, and that was not just pluralism. What is incredible now is that most of economists escaped from this for free. After 1-2 years, they are there saying exactly the same thing. I remember, and I close with this, that I read something of Randy Wray, and that was my idea, my hope and my idea too. In the midst of the crisis, maybe you will correct me if I'm wrong, he said it is important that this crisis is not resolved too early. If they last more, it can change something. You know, that didn't happen. I have a counterexample that may falsify me, because in Europe, the crisis went on without any sensible solution. So we have to mix this argument of mine with arguments about society and culture more generally. If there are other questions and answers, otherwise we close here and go drink.